On the 22nd of July 1966, during ground testing of an early supersonic fighter jet, an RAF engineer accidentally engaged the aircraft's afterburner and found himself catapulted into the air. This is the story of Wing Commander Walter Holden, nicknamed Taffy's 12-minute adventure in an English Electric Lightning supersonic interceptor, with no helmet, no canopy, and no jet flying experience. Holden had enlisted in the RAF during the war in 1943, having earned cadetship to university to study mechanical engineering. During this time, Holden also learned to fly on the de Havilland Tiger Moth biplane with the University Air Squadron. Following his studies, he was offered the choice of continuing with an engineering career or to follow a general flying duties career. Holden chose to continue in engineering, though did earn his pilot's wings after training on the T-6 Harvard and Chipmunk single-engine piston trainer planes, with it deemed prudent for his engineering role to gain flight experience. With his mechanical engineering background, Holden rose to take command of a storage unit at No. 33 Maintenance Unit RAF at RAF Lyneham. Before Holden's fateful flight, his maintenance unit at RAF Lyneham was responsible for servicing Gloucester Meteor fighter jets, English Electric Canberra jet bombers, and English Electric Lightnings. However, in 1966, the unit was in the process of closure, and its aircraft were being sent out to various other units. To do this, checks had to be performed on the jets before they were sent off. XM135, an English Electric Lightning, was being prepared for its departure, but over a period of weeks, it had been giving no end of trouble. Each time it was being flight tested, the pilot found that on the initial few yards of a takeoff run, the inverter, supplying power to the primary flight instruments, would cut out, and the standby inverter would have to cut in, which is clearly a problematic state of affairs. Electricians were working to establish the cause, each time thinking that they had removed, replaced, and tightened every likely component, followed by another attempt at a test flight after each attempted resolution. Test pilots had to be brought in for this, often from Boscombe Down, the RAF's primary test centre. It was a Boscombe Down pilot who next attempted to fly the aircraft, found the same problem persisting, and refused to fly until a more positive explanation could be determined. Back to the drawing board, electricians decided to devise some tests, which might isolate the fault and indicate roughly where and which component was generating it. They intended to ask the next test pilot to switch in and out parts of circuits throughout the test. Temporary wires installed from internal circuitry, requiring the cockpit canopy to be removed, and it was in this state the aircraft was made ready for another air test. However, for this next test on XM135, no pilot was available for at least another week. Moreover, with his unit closing down, many civilians being made redundant, and a timetable of clearance being upset with this rogue aircraft, there was a great deal of concern and irritation amongst the staff. One of Boscombe Down's pilots, who had previously performed lightning tests, suggested to Holden that he carry out the tests himself. Each test required different electrical configurations, with the engine pushed to high thrust, then cut, and the brakes be applied, similar to ground runs we see from restored Cold War aircraft today. This meant taxiing for 30 to 40 yards at a time, and would be a simple enough task for the experienced engineer and qualified pilot. He suggested using an out-of-use runway, runway 05 at the time, as Holden would only be using 30 or 40 yards to complete the test. Holden agreed, and on the 22nd of July 1966, XM135 was towed out to the runway for the electrical tests. Holden had only sat in a Lightning cockpit once before, and had no idea how to start its two Rolls-Royce Avon engines. The foreman of engine trades gave him a 5-minute briefing on how to do this as the aircraft was moved out. Fortunately for Holden, this included an explanation that although he would not be needing reheat, but it needed the throttles to be pushed past a reheat gate, and one had to feel for the gate keys behind the throttle to unlock it.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
On that 22nd of July, Holden performed a ground test. Since he wasn't expecting to fly, he was not wearing a helmet, and the aircraft was not fitted with a radio. Moreover, as mentioned before, the canopy was removed to allow electrical wires to run out of the cockpit. The Supersonic Lightning's landing gear was also locked in the down position for test mode. Holden's first test ran smoothly. He powered up to 90% throttle, with the aircraft rolling 30 to 40 yards before coming to a halt. However, on a subsequent test, Holden accidentally pushed the throttle past the afterburner gate, instantly feeling the acceleration kick in. Hurtling down the runway at afterburner with no helmet, radio or canopy, Holden only narrowly missed hitting a fuel tanker that was crossing the runway. As the Lightning crossed the main runway, Holden was overflown by a de Havilland Comet jetliner that was taking off. With the threshold of the runway approaching quickly and no time to stop, Holden's first thought was of the village of Bradenstoke just beyond the airfield. He pulled back on the stick and brought the Lightning airborne. After taking off, Holden located the gate key, frantically feeling around the cockpit, and disengaged the aircraft's afterburner. His first thought was to eject, though an impossibility with the ejection seat locked and disabled in ground mode. Forced to attempt a landing, and again, I think it's important to remember that he's flying a supersonic convertible at this point, Holden was forced to make several efforts at the airfield. His first two aborted because of speed and altitude. Holden was attempting to land on the active runway, runway 25, however found challenge with maintaining a suitable descent rate and speed, with the lip of the runway sitting above a drop into a valley. On his third attempt, he flew a wide circuit around the airfield and positioned for a landing in the opposite direction of the runway, avoiding the villages of Bradenstoke and Lyneham itself in the event of overrunning the runway. Whilst a far better approach, accustomed to flying tail dragger aircraft, Holden's landing angle resulted in a tail strike, with the Lightning's tail bumper impacting the runway and breaking off, also detaching the drogue chute Holden was relying on to come to a stop. With the jet's brakes engaged, the aircraft finally came to a rest just 100 yards from the end of the runway. Holden gingerly stepped out, himself and no one else injured. After Holden's Lightning flight, XM-135 was repaired and returned to service. She would go on to fly a total of 1,343 hours, of which 12 minutes could be attributed to Holden's accidental joyride. Following retirement, the aircraft was acquired by the Imperial War Museum at Duxford, where it remained on display. Holden himself remained in the RAF until retirement, passing away in 2016 at the age of 90.